Hello, my name is Ketavan. Welcome to my channel. I thought I'd take today to sort of go over the first 6 months of my Invisible Cities reading project. So if you don't know what Invisible Cities is, it's a reading project hosted by a bunch of different people here on YouTube. They select 2 countries every month, and then the idea is for us to read from those countries as well as listen to music, eat food, watch movies, documentaries, things like that. So it's a whole cool thing. I'll link something down below to explain everything more in depth, but essentially that's what it is. And so I've been following this project since the beginning of 2022. It's been going since January of 2021, and I just discovered it about 7 months ago now. So I discovered it and started following it. And initially I was reading, or rather buying, 2 books per month, 1 for each country. And I sort of changed that, and I'll explain later why and how I changed. But I thought I'd take this opportunity to see, like, okay, it's been the 6-month point, what's going on? Have I been enjoying it? Have I been reading the books that I've been purchasing? So we will see. So for January, the countries selected were Algeria and Singapore. And for Algeria, I have the Meursault investigation by Kamal Daoud. And this is translated by the French, from the French rather, by John Cullen. And this is a companion piece to The Stranger. It's following the life of the Arab man who was killed in The Stranger and not given a name. So this story is told through his brother's perspective, who explains, how his life was impacted by his brother's death. And it's very literary, but it is sort of describing through metaphor the impact of the French colonization on Algeria. So while I wouldn't say you can read this and really learn about Algeria, I think it's a really important perspective when reading about Algeria to incorporate into your thinking. So highly recommend that one. And for Singapore, we have The Man Who Wore His Wife's Sarong, Stories of the Unsung, Unsaid, and Uncelebrated in Singapore by Suchen, Christine Lim. And this is a collection of short stories. I actually just finished it a few weeks ago, but I highly, highly recommend it. It's a really interesting collection. A lot of these stories are queer. Some of them are not, though. And really, it's just a very interesting look at Singaporean culture, because it is so rigid. So the government is extremely strict. So many things are illegal in Singapore. Obvious human rights violations like being gay, but also things like chewing gum. So it's a very restrictive society. And so taking a look at sort of the underground people in Singaporean society is a very interesting perspective. A couple of my favorite stories in this collection are The Cleaner's Son, which is a mother's desperate attempt to access HIV medication for her HIV positive son. And then Gloria is also a really interesting look at how Singaporean wealthy families can exploit international domestic labor. So Gloria is their Filipino domestic worker whose story is very interesting. I don't want to spoil any of it, so I'll just leave it at that, but very, very good stories. So for February, we have Guyana and Uganda. So for Guyana, I selected Buxton Spice by Oonya Kempadoo, I think is how you say her name. So this is a very interesting story exploring a young girl and her friends exploring their emerging sexuality. I picked this up, I believe, back in February. I read about 20 pages of it. I enjoyed it. There was nothing that I didn't enjoy. I just didn't pick it up again afterwards. And I don't know if it was because, it was a very tropical atmosphere and it was February and kind of cold or what, but I definitely do want to get back to this, but I haven't actually read this. So that's my first didn't finish in this list. And then I've talked about this book a lot on here, White Teeth by Okot, so it's not glary, there you go. This is the story of a young man, an Akoli young man in Uganda who is in a very interesting period of history. In the midst of colonization, bride price has become inflated so much so that it becomes impossible to earn yourself. So he is trying, because he really wants to marry his girlfriend, and he goes to the big city in search of work, and his trials and tribulations. It's funny, it's tragic, highly recommended. It's super short. It's translated from the Ukoli by the author, and this one is a little bit harder to access. This one's not in print anymore, so I actually had it printed on demand, which was very expensive, but I loved it so much, so I do not regret it, but it was quite expensive. It was over 30 euros. So that might be a little bit harder to find, but I love, love, love this book. And for March, we have the Dominican Republic and Norway. So for Dominican Republic, I picked up Tentacle by Rita, and that's translated from the Spanish by Achy. And this one is so fun. It's sci-fi, punk, magical realism. You know, there's a lot of Santeria prophecy and Yoruba ritual like integrated. It's so, so interesting. It questions climate change, technology, Yoruba ritual, queer politics, poverty, sex, colonialism, contemporary art, bursting with punk energy and lyricism. It's less than 200 pages and it packs so much into it. It's fantastic. I cannot wait to read more from Rita, it's set in the future, so it's not exactly something you'd learn about like contemporary, you know, Dominican Republic, but it's basically just an amplification of the current issues in the Dominican Republic today. So that, in that sense, it was excellent for experiencing the Dominican Republic via literature. So that's Tentacle. And then for Norway, The Ice Palace by Tarjei Vesaas, and then that is translated by Elizabeth Rokkan. This is also very short. It's the story of two young girls who one decides to skip school one day and go play in the Ice Palace, which is sort of like a structure made out of ice that forms during wintertime when the waterfall splashback freezes. And she does not come back from playing, and she disappears and no one can find her. So the whole town is, you know, doing search parties trying to find her. And because, you know, the other girl, Sis is like the last person that she saw, and so everyone is like, where was she? What did she tell you? Is there anything you can do to help us? And she feels so much pressure and she feels so guilty, and she really becomes quite depressed. And it's like a very like lovely short story about, you know, depression and guilt and all these different things, and it's really, really beautifully written. Highly recommend. So for April, the country selections were Iran and Zambia. So for Iran, I have The Children of the Jacaranda Tree, which I have not read yet, and that's by Sahar Delijani. And this is actually autofiction. So initially I selected this book because it's about, you know, I feel like I've already read a lot about from people who have fled the revolution and have established themselves in other places, which is an important part of the story too. But I wanted to read something that was a little bit more about the people who stayed. And so this is a lot about political prisoners, and there's a whole cast of characters, but they all are sort of dealing with incarceration in some way. And one of the main characters was born in a prison. And then that's actually, I think, autofiction on the author's part, because she grew up in California after being born in the same prison that the character in the book is born in. So I'm very interested to read this. Like I'm super interested in all literature that deals with criminology in any way. And on top of that, learning about the revolution in Iran through this perspective would be really interesting as well. So I can't wait to get to this one. It hasn't happened yet. And then for Zambia, The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell. This one is this author's debut. It's super big. It's really impressive. It's over 500 pages long. And it's actually like a historical fiction that turns into sci-fi, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's a multi-generational story, so there's three families: a white colonizing family, a black Zambian family, and then a mixed race family. And they all live in Zambia, and each chapter is one member of three different generations. So there's 9 chapters. Each chapter is about a different person, and all the characters, they all intertwine in very different and unique ways that are surprising and sometimes a little obvious. But it's beautifully, beautifully written. And then at the very end, the 3 children, the youngest of the, you know, it's the mothers, the grandmothers, and the children. So the children get together to do something very interesting, fantastical. You know, the end is the sci-fi part, so that part I'm trying not to spoil. And we see how Zambian culture changes and shifts throughout the years, so it's very interesting from that perspective, for sure. So far I've told you about 8 books from the first 4 months of the year, and I've only not read 2 of them. But at this point, I actually had not read the majority of these, so I was saying to myself, you know, maybe it's not very realistic to do 2 countries per month, so maybe from now on, you'll only do 1 country per month, and we'll see how it goes. So since then, I've obviously caught up and read most of the books, but from now on, I only really chose 1 country per month. So for May, it was both El Salvador and Ukraine, and I chose Ukraine for obvious reasons. So I started off by reading Fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex by Oksana Zabusko, I believe is her name, and I read it on audio, so I don't have a copy, so I'll just put something here. So it is difficult to read, or it was difficult for me to read at least. It's Stream of Consciousness, which is always a little tough to follow, but I was listening to it on audiobook, and Hannah, my friend here who I read this in book club with, she read an e-copy, and she told me that, you know, the whole pages would just be in parentheses, and you'd have to go back and see, okay, that was one contained thought, and there'd be like, you know, 1 or 2 pages of a parentheses inside another parentheses, and it would be very difficult to sort of be like, where are you in this story? But at least on a physical copy, you can do that. Whereas on audio, it's just like, it just sounds like random thoughts strung together. So it was very, very difficult to follow. So I definitely didn't like get the larger overarching plot in any way, but I did really enjoy the insights that I got from the snippets that I knew had pieced together. So it was very much an interesting read. It's definitely not written for Western people or non-Ukrainian people. I selected it originally because it's like a bestseller in Ukraine for 15 years. It's, you know, supposed to define the country, and it really is an interesting exploration of the pull between the West and the East, but I definitely don't recommend it as the first Ukrainian book you read, for sure. And actually, I had selected a bunch of other Ukrainian literature to read, and actually after this book, I decided to pause reading on that instead and read some nonfiction, just a history of Ukraine or something like that, to sort of like fully understand everything before I do a deep dive into Ukrainian literature again. So I had actually taken a break on Lucky Breaks by Evgenia Belarusset, and this one is very interesting. It's actually written in Russian, which is very controversial, but it's translated by Eugene Ostashevsky, and so I'm looking forward to diving back into that after I read my Ukrainian nonfiction, which I actually was recommended to me by Micah Cummins. If you don't follow his channel, he's been on a huge Ukrainian Russian nonfiction kick lately, so I just picked up one of his recommendations, The Gates to Europe, I think is what it's called, and I just finished that one, and it's been very helpful in help contextualizing everything and understanding, you know, why certain things are said or framed a certain way. So that's Ukraine, and then for June, the selections were Qatar and also the Republic of Congo. So for the Republic of Congo is the one I chose. I didn't get anything for Qatar, and I chose Memoir of a Porcupine by Alain Mambaku, and it is translated from the French by Helen Stevenson, and I loved this one as well. It's told through the story of the porcupine, who is a double, an evil double, of a young boy turned man, and he is not a good person. He does a lot of bad things, or rather the porcupine does a lot of bad things for him. So it is definitely a lot of sad and awful things are done. You know, the porcupine does kill a lot of people, but the framing is hilarious, and the porcupine is writing the story because at the end of the man's life, he dies, and the porcupine is confused as to why he hasn't died, and so he lives, I think, about 3 days, and he writes this story down, and it's just very, very clever framing, and I enjoyed it. So it's really an interesting look at village life and also like community and, you know, who knows what and who talks about what to who. So it's very, very interesting look at kind of human nature in that sense. So recommend that one as well. So that is that for the first half of 2022. I purchased 10 books and I read 8 of them. So I think that's actually pretty good. We'll see if I kind of maintain for a while. I might, you know, for maybe September or October, pick up the second country. we'll see if that happens, but so far so good. So out of the 10 books I purchased, I read 8 of them, and out of those 8, I actually really enjoyed all of them. They're all 4 or 5 star reads to me, which, you know, that's almost like 100% success rate, which I wasn't expecting. And I think the reason why is because I was very careful about which books to select. I know that other channels like that are doing this Read Around the World challenge really want to focus on accessibility, and that's great. I really support that. I definitely will be using my library whenever I can to access these books. But I will say that I am very careful to not force myself into reading a book just because it's accessible. And I think that's important for me, at least, to fully enjoy what I'm reading. So like I mentioned, the Okot book was print on demand, and I had to basically pay a publisher to print a copy for me, so it was very expensive. But I think if I had picked his more famous book, which is an epic poem called Songs of Lowino and Okot, I think is what it's called, and I purchased that afterwards because I enjoyed White Teeth. But I think if I had read that one first, I wouldn't have necessarily enjoyed it as much. I don't know. Like I really feel like I knew that the Song of Lowino and Okot were the more accessible book, the more famous book, the more well-regarded book, but the actual premise and story of White Teeth drew me in more. And that's why I said, you know what, like I'll just pay for it. If I hate it, it's fine, but like I really thought that the premise was super interesting, so I wanted to read that story. And so that commitment to only really reading what I'm actually truly interested in, I think is what's made my reading so successful in terms of enjoyment, because I'm not feeling pressured to read what's popular or read what's easily found. I don't know, so I'll reflect on this throughout the year and see how it goes, but so far I'm really thinking that my system of selection is a good one, and I think I'll keep it for the time being at least, but we'll see if I ever go back to 2 countries a month. We'll see. But anyway, I want to hear from you. Like how is your Invisible Cities challenge going? What's your favorite read of the year from Invisible Cities? Do you have any left unread that you still need to get to? Any of that stuff, let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, bye!